Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be battling an ancient evil that has risen again in Lord of the Rings of Power. Then we will be juggling our career in superhero lore in She-Hulk Attorney at Law. And finally, we will be competing for the Bloodstone in Marvel's Halloween special, Werewolf by Night. No colon in that title. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Well, if we haven't mentioned enough major franchises in the last few seconds, I'm going to bring Batman into it. Specifically, the Harley Quinn animated series from DC, Warner Brothers, HBO, whatever they are. This has just started its third season on Channel 4 in the UK, and I have seen the first half of it, the first chunk that has aired, which features Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy finally getting together after some tense will they won't they in the first two seasons, and then attempting to balance their new relationship with Poison Ivy's plan to terraform the whole of Gotham and turn it into a jungle paradise. Yeah, this is the usual combination of dark comedy relationship drama and funny supervillain stuff, as Harley Quinn sort of wrestles for her place in the supervillain community, and the fact that a lot of people just view her as Joker's girlfriend, but also the fact that she is kind of demented and often just blows shit up for the sheer sake of it. So persuading people she's actually a serious, competent villain can sometimes be quite hard work. And yeah, this is the third season of this. It's been quite popular. It's, I think, one of the most successful DC things that's come in a few years, to be honest. But then again, I always say this about the TV shows, and then someone cancels them. So who knows what the real answer to this is. But I enjoy this show. This show is a lot of fun. It finally makes all the Batman jokes that you want them to make. If you didn't think there were enough jokes made by official DC products about Batman's daddy issues, then just the episode I've just most recently seen featured Batman getting lonely because Catwoman has left him, so buying two cats and naming them after his parents without realising he's named them after his parents, and then when someone points this out, proceeding to dress them up as his parents. It's
Okay.
It's a deeply odd show. I know that it's on some level not really that impressive to give corporations credit for being willing to somewhat make fun of themselves, because really that's just their way of saying, hey guys, I'm just one of the lads, when they're really obviously just a massive corporation. But yeah, I can't say it isn't fun seeing them do all these self-aware, snarky Batman jokes in an official DC product.
Yeah, I mean, this does seem to be very successful as a show. It's one of the DC and even Marvel shows that I've heard people talking about it who don't religiously follow all the big geek media. It seems to have in some degree broken the mainstream. I guess partly because it's got Batman in it and everyone's aware of Batman. Partly because it has a reputation for being a genuinely funny show, which I think is allowed it to cross into a more mainstream audience.
I mean, there's a lot of, successful adult animation out there, Rick and Morty still going. And yeah, I think there's definitely a market for a show with that kind of zany, silly, needlessly adult and gory humour, which also has Batman in it. The amount they're willing to let Harley Quinn swear in the vicinity of Batman is impressive, I'll give them that. In some episodes it does feel like they just like to say fuck, but it is also kind of funny.
Yeah. This is a show I would really like to watch. Unfortunately, I've not been able to catch up with it because they refused to put the back seasons on 4OD, or All 4 as it's now called. Assuming some kind of vague kind of sex joke. But come on, Channel 4, put the back episodes up so people can catch up.
Yeah, I know. This is a thing I'm having to arrange my schedule quite carefully in order to watch on the system that airs it in the UK. Because, yeah, they stick each episode up for 30 days and then they air them for once a week, which means you can't wait till it's finished and then binged it. Because by the time the show's finished, the first 5 or 6 episodes have been deleted. Yeah. And they never ever put them back. And it is a bit annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it is like old school TV, I suppose, when you had to watch stuff either when it was on or shortly afterwards, because you taped it and you only had a limited amount of tape in your house. I don't know, a bit retro in a cool way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just means I end up watching each season in 2 or 3 chunks, to be honest. I watched the first 5 episodes, then I wait about a month and then watch the other 5. And it's a bit annoying, but it works. I mean, for the record, you can buy them from Amazon if you want for 14 quid a season. But yeah, that seems to be the only option.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll have to do that before next year.
It is extremely funny. It's a high quality adult animation. I'm not sure if the third season's doing it for me quite as much as the first 2. But to be fair, the first 2 did both really come into their own towards the end when they built to this sort of incredibly manic conclusion with about 20 different Batman villains all just throwing their poo at each other. It's hard not to mention their version of Bane, who is just this massive sort of insecure giant. They've taken that sort of weird, posh British accent that Tom Hardy gave him in The Dark Knight Rises, and they've really run with it to the extent that, Bane is this massive guy who talks in this quiet, posh accent about how insecure he is. but is also on drugs and therefore occasionally just flies into a random rage and wrecks a load of stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sounds good. I mean, it sounds like they are embracing the wackier side of Batman, the bit more Alice in Wonderland-esque aspects to it that I suppose came through more in things like the Adam West Batman TV show or the Joel Schumacher films, the Batman not taking as desperately serious as we've taken Batman recently, which, to be fair, as a change of tone is very welcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a cartoon, and therefore they're going for the bigger, more cartoony visuals. Like, it's got Poison Ivy as a main character, and she does a lot of, magically growing plants and magically riding around on giant vines. One of the supporting characters is one of Poison Ivy's pet talking plants. Another one is a massive talking shark. King Shark from the Suicide Squad, if anyone who saw that. They're definitely taking advantage of the fact that this is a cartoon to do some of the bigger, sillier, DC, vaguely Batman-adjacent concepts.
Yeah, I've always been wondering when are they going to try to do a dark and gritty Poison Ivy as they work their way through the Batman villains. We've had dark and gritty Riddler. I mean, that's next, shortly before they try dark and gritty Mr. Freeze, at which point the universe implodes.
You could do dark and gritty Mr. Freeze. He's a tragic character. It's fine. There's lots of grim things you can do with freezing people. It's quite an unpleasant way to die.
That's a good point, actually, yeah. And he has to have the whole tragically his wife's dying thing. I think it's just, everyone just remembers Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "I'm not going to be taken to the cooler," or whatever the line is. But yeah, we're not here to review Joel Schumacher Batman films.
There are a lot of good sort of cameos from Batman and various villains, but the core of it is the sort of Harley Quinn Poison Ivy relationship, which is actually very touchy. I can see why so many people ship it. They do a good job of making this sort of weird, sort of odd couple thing work. It's very well written and well built over the course of the 3 seasons, and it does provide some sort of semi-serious emotional core to this really, really silly TV show. So yeah, it's a good time. If you can find a way to watch it, which will be much easier for Americans than Brits, then go right ahead.
Sounds good.
So yeah, Alistair, what have you been watching in the last fortnight?
So I've been making my annual trip to the London Film Festival. A gathering of filmmakers, big and small, all genres, different styles, from around the world that takes place in London over 12 days every October, featuring everything from premieres from forthcoming major films down to obscure documentaries and bits of video art. Yeah, so this year I went to see 9 films. That's less than my record of 14, which, if anything, was too many films in 14 films in 12 days. I didn't think it was possible for me to get bored to go to the cinema. But 9 is actually a good number. And yeah, this year I kind of went for more high-profile stuff, which was good. And I saw a lot of interesting things with well-known actors and directors. Yeah, that was good. I guess this year I didn't really stumble over the rare, incredibly rare hidden gem, like a brilliant Emirati horror movie or, I don't know, kind of like an amazing Ecuadorian documentary. But I did see some very good films. One of the things that jumped out to me the most was The Wonder, a new film starring Florence Pugh that I went to the premiere of at the South Bank Centre. And yeah, it's based on a novel that's I've not read, but everyone who has read it says it's very good. Set in 19th century rural Ireland about this girl who has not eaten for 4 months and claims she survives purely on manna from heaven. And Florence Pugh is a nurse who's dispatched to investigate this and decide if this is genuinely a miracle or some kind of trick. And yeah, that film goes to some dark places. It's quite eerie, it's quite creepy, it's very well directed, it's got a great soundtrack. I'd highly recommend that. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Oscar nominations in it for that, especially for Florence Pugh, who's great in the lead role. That's a Netflix film, so that should be on Netflix probably towards the end of the year, early part of next year. Yeah, that's one of the things that really jumped out at me. I saw a horror film set in prehistoric Scotland. That was really interesting. Yeah, set 45,000 years ago, about some of the first people who arrived in Scotland. All done in a made-up Neolithic language. That was really, really quite scary. Yeah, totally worked. Pulled that one off. Sounds weird, but yeah, genuinely scary, genuinely quite moving. I saw Aubrey Plaza's new film, Emily the Criminal, co-starring the guy who played Shades in Luke Cage. That was, excellent. Another gritty crime drama set in modern LA, exploring how work is essentially a con, and the only way to get ahead is to break the law and commit some crimes. And Aubrey Plaza's great in everything, so I enjoyed that.
And yeah, this was my annual trip to the London Film Festival, accompanying Alistair to Emily the Criminal. And yeah, it's a good time. It's a good example of the sort of normal person sinks deeper into crime subgenre. And yeah, as Alistair said, putting Aubrey Plaza into that film is an extremely fun decision. Although, to be fair, she's not really going full Aubrey Plaza in this. She's playing it relatively subdued and straight as a sort of every person. But she's still very, very good and very, very charismatic, and plays the shit out of the moments where the character finally snaps and maybe starts to embrace crime life a bit more.
Yeah, I think she's playing against type a bit, but at the same time, it goes to show how talented she is as an actress. And, she really gets across just how angry this young woman is. How, life has just been quite unfair to her, even though she's just trying to live a normal life. Because, working on 0 hours contracts or in the sort of gig economy, or trying to get a job as a designer, but they only offer unpaid work, is, all the legitimate work out there is basically some kind of con. So why not just be the conner, not the connie? It's quite an interesting angle. Yeah, that was very good. Saw quite a few documentaries, including a great documentary I can highly recommend called Meet Me in the Bathroom, about the New York music scene in the early aughts, kind of charting the rise of the Strokes, the AAS and LCD sound system. Yeah, that's really interesting, especially if you're interested in the music of that period. Great soundtrack. And they got all the major players to kind of talk at one point or another. I believe the director said they made it during lockdown, so I think a lot of the bands were at home and willing to do Zoom interviews. So that probably worked out quite well for them. Certainly recommend that. If you're looking for something a bit more offbeat, I did see One Fine Morning, French film starring Lee Seydoux. That's from the directors of Bergman Island, which I also highly recommend. And that's about a millennial-aged woman living in Paris, caring for her aging father who's suffering mental decline and they don't know what to do with him, and also looking for love as a single parent. It's it's an arty French film about life in beautiful Parisian apartments, but it is very, very gripping, and Lee Seydoux is great in that. Another standout was also Know Your Place, a film set in the Eritrean community in Seattle, again about sort of poverty and gentrification, and one teenager's epic quest to deliver a suitcase to his mum's friend, despite his ability to fuck everything up, including losing a phone with the address in it and things like that, which can be weirdly funny but also was quite moving. So there's a good smashing of films I'd recommend.
Sounds good. And yeah, I can obviously recommend Emily the Criminal, and out of those, if nothing else, I'll probably try and see The Wonder. I enjoy a good Florence Pugh performance.
Yeah, I'd certainly recommend The Wonder. It's very powerful. It's quite affecting, it's got a dark edge to it. Yeah, it definitely jumped out as one of the best things I saw at the festival. Emily the Criminal currently doesn't have a UK distribution date. I really hope it gets at least some kind of release, if not on Netflix or Mubi, then in the cinema, because I thought that was very good and a film that had something to say about the modern world dressed up in a tense crime film. So I hope it can reach a bigger audience.
Yeah, no, I agree. See it if you can. I gather I think it's come out in America, because I've seen at least one American I follow talking about seeing it. I suppose maybe they're just also on the film festival scene.
Yeah, I think it did have an American release date when I checked, and there's a trailer out on YouTube, so that implies some kind of release schedule somewhere. I guess it might be at the festival shopping for UK distribution, as a lot of films are. So yeah, I hope they made some good deals. But yeah, that was a good festival this year. Certainly good to see it back in person, with like live events, talks, screenings where they have directors and actors and, there to discuss their work. That's all fun. And yeah, they continue with the immersive VR experience bit this year, which I also attended. And that was cool if you want to see a plane flying straight towards you, or to have a harrowing explanation of what it was like to be in Hawaii when they thought they were going to get nuked. So yeah, that was interesting as well.
Okay, and first up today, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, the new fantasy prequel series from Amazon Prime. Taking place before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's classic trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, this tells the story of, how various things that were in The Lord of the Rings came to be. Did you ever wonder how Mordor, the Rings, Sauron, and loads of other stuff, probably Gandalf as well, came to exist? Then you'll love this show. Apparently it's also really expensive. We've both seen it. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Well, Tolkien's obviously well known for having this rich imagination and a really deep and complex world that he built up to dive into. So there's a lot of mythos that surrounds, as you said, what led to all these things that you see in Lord of the Rings. And there's a lot of really rich sort of potential for story there. Yeah, and in this kind of earlier stage of the history of Middle-earth, it's a bit more magical, and there's more magic in the world, there's more elves and gods and stuff directly intervening. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there, and I felt this show really didn't seize the possibility to tell this kind of epic mythical tale. Yeah, the sort of stuff that Tolkien's known for, especially in this kind of background of the Legendarium. Yeah, there's a lot of wasted potential. The show itself was quite slow paced. They could have certainly crammed in more events. I mean, God knows there's enough history in the Legendarium for them to include more events actually going on and more things woven in. So yeah, I felt that they could have brought the epic more rather than make it what is a sort of slow paced show in which, although there were some big events and the plot did move forwards, not a huge amount happened.
Yeah, Alistair has just said in a much more flowery, evocative fashion what I was going to say, which is basically this is just kind of mediocre, isn't it? It just kind of trudges along uninspiringly. It's probably just about got its shit enough together for me not to go, oh, it's shit. But it is a bit of a slog. It's possible I'm just not a big enough Tolkien fan, you know. I've seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the cinema once. I've never read any of the books. I've never watched them again. I've never seen the Hobbit films. I did read The Hobbit once as a child, maybe. But no, not a huge fan. But yeah, I feel like the entire show lacks strong characters, and the first half of the season also lacks that much in the way of engaging plot. I don't know. I found the characters particularly hard to reckon with because a lot of them are really quite flat, which I don't think is a Tolkien problem. In that, you know, Lord of the Rings does have strong, memorable characters. You know, people like Gandalf and Frodo and Samwise and Merry and Pippin are iconic, along with Legolas and Gimli. And yeah, there's a lot of characters in there who are memorable and who have distinct personalities and strong relationships. And there's hardly any of those characters in this, which is one of the biggest things which just bounced me off it entirely. I could probably have got on board with this quite slow mythos building if they'd had the decency to include a few more actually good characters. I liked the dwarf, Durin. His relationship with Elrond was actually quite nicely done. The actor playing Durin especially, I thought really played it incredibly well. He was the highlight of the whole show for me. Most of the rest of them were they seemed nice enough, I guess, and the lead character Galadriel is a whole separate section for me. I bounced off her pretty hard.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I have the same note that, Durin and Elrond was, an actual sort of nice character dynamic. There was, a real sense of a friendship there. They've been, tested through time, and how they had sort of brought in the politics of the relationships between the elves and the dwarves and the things they were doing, and his relationship with his father and things like that. That was a bit of complex sort of character development. That bit sort of worked, but there wasn't a huge amount of progress made in, again, that storyline.
It always felt like a different show. I mean, as you say, the fact that the characters were actually quite rich and well drawn and actually having, meaningful emotional conversations seemed very at odds with the rest of the show where that was not happening.
Yeah, and then there was a few cliched bits, like there's an elf who's in love with a human, which is in a sort of love across the barricades sort of thing going on. Yeah, then there's various other bits and pieces. My big turn off for this show was the Hobbit plot line. I just didn't find the Hobbits particularly interesting or unusual, and that they were sort of this very twee English, very twee depiction of a traveller society of people living in sort of wagons and moving them around, but also seemed to be weirdly strict and authoritarian in a very sweet way. Like no one's allowed to wander off, and they keep this sort of caravan train thing, and where you are in the train seems to be strongly determine your status in society, but it's all done in this bizarre twee way, with the very obvious character of the young headstrong hobbit who wants to break out and find, forge her own path. And it was all just a combination of being far too twee, not very interesting, and kind of original. Bizarrely also, leader of the hobbits, Lenny Henry.
Yeah, who did, do some decent acting in the scenes he got, but yeah, I thought the actor playing the main hobbit was decent enough in a sort of every person way, but yeah, the actual storyline was a bit of a weird rambling diversion.
So yeah, I'm not a fan of the hobbits and things like that. And if there is a main character, then it's as you mentioned, Galadriel, played by Milford Clark, I believe it's pronounced. I think she's a very good actress. I think the character is quite, again, a bit one-dimensional in that she's looking for revenge for her brother's death at the hands of Sauron, purely by sort of anger and hate. The main thing just made me really want to see St. Maud, was it the horror movie that she got her breakthrough in, is my main motivation, because she is certainly a very talented actress and very well cast, I thought.
I haven't seen her in anything else that I'm aware of, and I found this character quite annoying, which is a problem because she's on screen a huge amount of the time.
Yeah, she's the main character, I guess.
Yeah. It seemed very much like we were meant to think she was awesome in a way that they didn't really build up to or earn. She felt a bit like the sort of character people used to complain about in the last 10-15 years, where it feels like the character brief was just strong female character, which means she's good at fighting and she smirks and is a bit grim and has this sort of rough drive for revenge, and there's just not a lot else to it. I'm sure the actor is good, but whoever was directing them just smirk a lot, really wasn't doing them any favours.
No.
Yeah, I found that character quite annoying, and a lot of the other characters, as I say, just felt a bit flat. I don't know. To use the really, really painfully obvious comparison, like Game of Thrones has a very rich ensemble of interesting characters played by watchable actors, you know. Could they have used some of those piles of Amazon cash to get a few more actors on the level of, you know, Matt Smith, Sean Bean, Lena Headey, even, you know, do a bit of searching and find some people as good as any of the Stark kids, you know. There's just a lot of people here who are quite unengaging.
It is bizarre that they've spent gajillions of money on this. Apparently, it's got this one show cost something like double the BBC's commissioning budget for fiction for a year. It is bizarre that they have spent so much money on it and there's not very many well-known names in it. Is it possibility they seem to have shot it all on location in New Zealand and it does look spectacular, and they've piled, you know, enormous amounts of money into visual effects. Is it possible that after all of that there wasn't much left over for casting? But yes, I think you are right that maybe if they could have cut a few sweeping vistas of New Zealand countryside to hire some different cast, it would have been good.
Yeah, I don't know. I just found it quite flat. I mean, as I said, the plot thankfully picked up in the second half, and the various threads started to come together, and we started to get some idea where it was going. And although where it is going is very much what I would very, very generally categorise as prequel shit. In that, you know, have you ever wondered where Mordor came from? Have you ever wondered where the rings come from? Well, good news.
Well, as we discussed, you know, when we discussed prequels quite frequently, because they seem to make a lot of prequels these days. I guess it's because it's kind of, do you like that thing? But if we do a sequel to it, people will be, well, I haven't seen the thing, so I'm not going to watch this. But if it's a prequel, you don't need to know.
It feels like you kind of do, though, because there's a lot of moments where I was a bit sort of, I feel like I'm missing a reference here. Like, there's a bit towards the end, which I guess I'll break my back not to spoil, where a character says a line in a very portentous way, and I googled it, and it turns out, yes, that this is heavily implying that this character is another well-known Lord of the Rings character, which I'm sure the Lord of the Rings fans got immediately, but just didn't really carry for me.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's kind of a level of impenetrability that doesn't really make something accessible to a mainstream audience. There's also this element of it lacks tension. If you're just going to have like, well, there's this area of the world that's called Mordor or whatever, then it's like, well, we know what's going to happen to that. It's going to turn into a volcanic wasteland.
It's called the Southlands, isn't it? And then it gets renamed Mordor after it becomes volcanic wasteland.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe that's a bad example, because I suppose, yeah, but I don't know, yeah, when they start making a ring or something like that, obviously you know where that's going to go. Or again, when the dwarves start digging deep into Moria, and you're basically like, okay, well, I wonder what's going to happen if they keep digging down. Oh yeah, I know what's happened because I've seen bloody Lord of the Rings. There's a Balrog down there that they're going to unearth.
I don't know. As I say, there's a possibility that I'm just being bitchy about a show that isn't really aimed at me. But as someone who has, you know, positive memories of watching and enjoying the Lord of the Rings films, I thought it might be aimed at me. But I don't know, maybe I just don't love them enough. Yeah, there's just a lot of huge, glaring, swaggering pretentiousness. Is it pretentiousness? So self-importance, I guess. Swaggering self-importance to some moments. Like, there's a bit where, towards the end of episode, I want to say 5, maybe 5, something like that, they're leaving the city of Númenor to go and sail off and have a fight. And Galadriel steps up onto the ship wearing her battle armour, and the strings swell to a point that's so massive I actually burst out laughing. And yeah, I think it just really felt like it was meant to be this huge epic moment of our hero restored to her full glory, ready to go into battle. And I was like, okay.
They haven't earned it.
No, they haven't earned this. I didn't feel like that she was ever really, you know, fallen from grace. She hasn't really displayed any weakness. She's just been smug.
I mean, what you just said is, I guess, hit on my two sort of main points about this show, which is, I understand what you're saying, that like maybe you don't love Lord of the Rings enough to appreciate this, but the thing about that is they spent £1 gazillion on this, and they clearly want to make it a mainstream success. There's like adverts for it all over the London Underground. There's been lots and lots of media coverage. This is clearly not aimed at the hardcore Tolkien fan base. It's aimed at a mainstream audience. Like I say, you said you enjoyed Lord of the Rings. They're trying to capture that level of mainstream popularity, which is why it's bizarre that they didn't make it more fun and engaging. That is a bit of a problem. But the other thing is that weirdly, it's also too Tolkien-y for mainstream success, but it's not Tolkien-y enough in some levels, in that it's not really an epic deep dive into the world of Tolkien, because there's so many layers of mythology that they could have brought in that just didn't, because it's quite slow paced and they just have the same few characters going through the same few bits of drama over and over. I mean, they could have fitted in a lot more stuff. Kind of like things like the various heroes and gods and stuff are mentioned every so often. It's like, well, bring them in. You've got 8 episodes, and each one's over an hour long, but it seems to be sacrificed for slow pacing. And there's so much richness to the Tolkien world that they could have explored. I mean, to be honest, one of my favourite things of watching this show was after each episode just going onto YouTube and looking at the Tolkien fan community on YouTube and who've done all these explainer videos about the mythos and the legendarium and the Silmarillion and all the other bits and pieces, and watching videos of people talking about the actual lore, which is more dense and there's more characterization, more interesting stuff going on. So I don't understand how they made something that seems to be too Tolkien-y for mainstream success, but not Tolkien-y enough for people who are interested in the legendarium.
Well, I guess it's swinging at some very obvious sort of, do you remember this from Lord of the Rings stuff, isn't it? Like, even I, someone who last engaged with this franchise best part of 20 years ago, whenever Return of the King was first released into cinemas, that is the last time I engaged with the Lord of the Rings in any way. And it's engaging with it on a level that I can still vaguely remember what they're talking about. It's got Sauron, it's got Mordor, it's got the rings of Lord of fame. It's got an elf having a sort of prickly but lovable relationship with a dwarf. It's got some hobbits meeting Gandalf. They're doing it in a very sort of remember this from Lord of the Rings way. And as you say, it's not going into it at any deeper level, but it's also not doing it in a way that's as fun as the original, which just makes it seem like a sort of really flat carbon copy.
So there's sort of a twist at the end that did actually sort of catch me out a bit, but it's partly because I'd assumed that the twist would be more obvious than it was, but they did actually manage to pull the wool over my eyes. And there was an epic battle in the third last episode that was pretty good.
As I say, the second half of the season, when the fight started, was good. The twist in the final episode was pretty decent, although the cheap fake-out they did before the actual twist was really stupid. Yeah, though there's some good stuff in plot terms towards the end. It would have got me more if I'd been more engaged with the characters, but as plot twists, they did kind of work. There's a decent bit in episode, I want to say 6, where we're following this sort of magical item through the battle, and they actually managed to do a feint where you think someone has the magical item, but someone else has the magical item, and it actually matters. And it's quite well done. It's a nice bit. There's a couple of good plot bits towards the end.
So yeah, it's not a train wreck. I just do feel that with the money involved, they could have delivered more. And also, they should have bear in mind mainstream sensibilities if they're aiming at a mainstream audience, which they clearly are with this kind of budget and something of this status. I mean, I do enjoy the rich world building of Tolkien, but a kind of a detailed mythos does not make a show. What makes a show is like plot, character, which they could have invested more in.
Yeah. I think just better characters would probably have made it work, but that's not what we got. Maybe next season. Okay, and next up, we'll be talking about She-Hulk Attorney at Law Season 1. This is, of course, the Marvel legal superhero comedy starring Tatiana Maslany as Jen Walters, aka She-Hulk, who becomes a Hulk after getting in a car crash with her cousin, Bruce Banner, aka the He-Hulk, and getting... I stole that joke from Chip Zdarsky, but it is a good joke. And getting some of his blood in one of her open wounds, and then, after discovering that her form of Hulk is a lot more controllable and less consumed with rage than the other one, decides to just try and go back to her regular life practicing law, except as a Hulk, only to find that it's harder to just ignore being a Hulk than she'd hoped. We have now seen the whole first season of this. Alistair, what did you think?
Fair play to Marvel for this one, that this is, a sitcom set in the MCU. I think, if you embrace this as this is a sitcom, 25-minute episodes once you cut out the enormous amounts of credits. 25-minute episodes, comedic sort of premise, played primarily for laughs. The plot is not inconsequential, but you're here for the jokes and good humour of it. And they managed to pull that off. There's a lot of meta, self-aware jokes that, are quite enjoyably postmodern. And add another level of humour when Jen Walters can turn to camera and make some comments about this is a predictable plot twist, isn't it? Or something like that. Good writing. I feel that Tatiana Maslany is doing a lot of the heavy lifting by just being sort of charming and funny and a great lead. So overall, I like this. I don't think this is going to be one of my favourite, of the Marvel TV shows or favourite shows of the year, but I enjoyed this and found it funny.
Yeah, no, I liked this. It was a show I look forward to every week and watched the first chance I got after it dropped, which is something I haven't done with the Marvel shows for a while, to be honest. I thought the tone and Tatiana Maslany's performance do a lot to really make it just reliably fun and likeable. I think the plot sometimes feels a bit underbaked. I think credit to them, as Alistair said, for trying to do this sort of sitcom format. But there are a few episodes where they try and cram in a sort of sitcom-style B-plot, and it feels like they're ending up having to rush a bit to fit everything into the whole just 25-minute slot. And as a result, everything ends up feeling a bit underserved. Which is a shame. I like the idea of having a B-plot like a sitcom, but I think the episodes will probably need to be closer to the 40-minute Ally McBeal mark to pull that off. And I'm guessing with the cost of the She-Hulk effects, they're probably not going to do that.
Or they'd have to go in for that super tight sitcom writing that like the best episode of like Friends or Simpsons or Space. There's like sitcoms that are I mean, I find the obsession with Friends interminable, but there are some great writing because these B plots, you don't notice it, but they may only be like 3 scenes. Each one's only like 1 minute long because it's just like bang, comedic setup, bang, comedic development, bang, comedic payoff. Which they don't really do in this. They do adopt a slightly more leisurely Marvel pace.
Well, yeah, and also it's not really... They're trying to do sort of a frisson of actual drama as well. There's a bit of actual character development. There's action scenes. And as a result, they just don't have the space to do that much plot density. And it does mean some of the secondary characters feel a bit thin, I must admit. The non-She-Hulk characters in this show, like the supporting cast from her law firm, don't feel super well developed. The characters who really get good play apart from She-Hulk are the guest stars who have had their development on other shows. But yeah, I think they pulled it together a lot as it went. I think it feels very inconsistent at times, and it feels like they're sort of working out exactly what the show is kind of as they go, which isn't, unusual for a comedy. There are a lot of sitcoms where you don't feel like they fully got it together till like towards the end of season 1 or even season 2. I think Parks and Rec and The Office are the famous examples. More recently, I watched Mythic Quest, which also, I think, had a decent season 1 and then a much better season 2. She-Hulk, towards the end of season 1, did start to put itself together quite well. I thought the last 3 episodes was a good tight run, a point at which they really felt like they worked out what they were doing. And it kind of felt like what they were doing was not really having B-plots anymore, which is kind of a shame, but it did work a lot better.
Yeah, and they did also do the single location, single episodic plot. And then, obviously it's a Marvel show and it's a contemporary show, so it's pinning heavily at arc plot. And there was an arc plot for the series. But like, for example, there's an episode when She-Hulk is stuck due to a minor car accident at the meditation retreat that's run by the Abomination, played by Tim Roth, who's now reinvented himself as a sort of wellness guru for men trying to find their place in the modern world. It's a classic sitcom episode. Uptight lawyer type has to spend a few days in the meditation hut and the discussion circle, and it sounds like something from any number of sitcoms, just with an added level of Marvelness in that she's a Hulk and can transform into a supervillain. And like some of the other characters are like B-list villains, like Porcupine or something.
Yeah, I think that tone of sort of light silliness and sort of comic-y self-awareness is something they more or less pull off, even when the plots are sometimes a bit weird and uneven. And that makes it, fun and endearing to watch, even when things aren't quite working. Like, there's a running subplot with Titania, played by Jimmy LeJamil, who ends up being a bit of a lightweight, one-dimensional comedy character, to be honest. But at least she has fun with it, I suppose. And the scene... Some of the legal stuff is better developed than other bits. There are some where they clearly don't actually know how to end their own legal plots. But the bit where she has to beat Titania to get ownership of her own name by proving she's used it on a dating app to date a bunch of losers is quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, again, could be a sitcom episode if it wasn't, trying to get the ownership of a superhero name. It's basically, someone has to publicly own up to their self-humiliation in order to get what they want. It just could be straight out of like any sitcom of the last 20 years.
Yeah, that's a bit where they get the vibe they want and actually pull it off, yeah. And also, I guess hard not to comment on this, it's nice to see Charlie Cox back as Daredevil in the final couple of episodes. As I say, it does, I think, get its shit together and work out what it is a lot towards the end. And Cox helpfully turns up just in time for when the show is really firing pretty well. And yeah, he's very good. The show in those episodes is very good.
Yeah, I mean, he's always been good. We discussed his run of Daredevil on the podcast, especially the most recent series, the final one they did on Netflix, which we liked a lot. Yeah, and it was good to see him back. He's a good actor. I did also appreciate how they were willing to poke fun, at their characters, or some, poke fun at the big characters like Daredevil and Bruce Banner and the Hulk. I do have to ask, some of the really ridiculous minor characters they've thrown in, are these sort of Z-list Marvel villains from over the years, characters like the Porcupine or Leapfrog?
Yeah.
These are all actually ripped from the comics, are they?
They publish like 80 superhero comics a month, Alistair. There's a lot of random villains in there.
Yeah, but I just glad these are, because obviously anyone could just make up a silly superhero like the Porcupine. He's a man who wears spiky armor, But this is an actual. I like the fact that they're acknowledging that there's some really daft shit in this Marvel universe. We might as well make fun of it.
Yeah, there was some enjoyable pokes at Daredevil. I liked the bits where it looked like he was about to have one of his moody hallway fights, and then She-Hulk just came through the ceiling.
Yeah, that was good setup.
That was a good moment. And just in general, I think Charlie Cox, he's back in the part, but he's playing, I think, a slightly different, more light-hearted, fun, charismatic version of Daredevil here, as I guess signified by the fact he's wearing a slightly brighter yellow costume.
As has been pointed out by lots of people on the internet, not me, one of the sort of weirdly inconsistent things in the Marvel universe is characters can change massively from franchise to franchise when they're cameoing to suit the needs of that franchise. Like Captain America is quite a warm, nice person in his own film. So when he, especially in when he needs to be a gruff army man in Age of Ultron, they just change him to be like that because that's what the plot needs. So yeah, I mean, trying to find consistency across the MCU is getting close to the similar level of futility of trying to find consistency across Doctor Who.
This is true, but I don't think the Daredevil portrayal here particularly contradicts anything that was in Daredevil. He's just, a guy having a nicer time.
It's a different emphasis, I think.
Yeah, and Daredevil's always been a bit of a womanizer. In the comics especially, he's cheated on people and slept around a bit in his time, old Daddy.
Old Daddy. Yeah, I mean, but it works. I'm glad that they adapted the character to suit the tone of this show, because the tone and the sense of humour is what makes it work.
And the meta touches you mentioned earlier, of course, builds to a ludicrous climax in the final episode, which I don't know if we need to specifically spoil, but it is ridiculous and quite funny.
It's certainly very, very silly, and it did make me laugh. I felt that it did undermine some of the serious plot, and I guess I did start this by saying they did this as a sitcom, and its best approach as a sitcom to be funny. So on that level, it worked. But I did feel they kind of unwound quite a lot of the plot of the show to the point that it kind of made me think, well, what was the point in sitting through this plot if it's just going to be unwound at the end in a sort of meta joke? I suppose that was sort of funny, which I guess is the point.
Yeah, I like the sort of awareness of Marvel things building to this sort of massive multi-way punch-up for seemingly no real reason, and then just having the decency to comment on it.
Yeah.
Does this mean they'll stop doing it? Probably not.
I mean, it was very funny when, the Hulk just turns up, Bruce Banner, Hulk, turns up for, no reason at the end, and they're like, he's just turned up for no reason, this is just to get the famous guy in. And I was like, yeah, that's funny. And it would be ridiculous if he just showed up at that point.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. I think it has the potential to, if they could get the level of consistency up and make all the episodes in Season 2 as good as the last few episodes of Season 1, then yeah, this could be really good. I hope they actually make a Season 2.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things they've started so many shows. How many of them are actually going to get second series?
Well, Loki, apparently.
Yeah, that's the only one. Well, some of them are bridging to other films.
Yeah, it'll be interesting at some point to see at what point we actually get a second season of most of these. What If, I guess, is getting a second year. But everything else, yeah, is sort of hanging in the air. I could do more She-Hulk. I feel like She-Hulk especially, the show actually has a format, which they're doing, which doesn't just feel like it's prep for a movie. I can imagine them just making a Moon Knight movie.
Yeah.
To follow up the series instead of another TV show, because, it was just basically a stretched out movie and it's got Oscar Isaac in it. That could easily be a movie.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. They should be contractually obliged to do a Hawkeye Christmas every year, I feel.
It's Guardians of the Galaxy this year, mate, I'm afraid. They're doing the Guardians holiday special.
Yeah, maybe I guess they're going to rotate it around each year. But yeah, I did appreciate the sort of meta silliness of this. I guess I feel it's not the first time that this sort of, way of poking fun at a franchise has been done, certainly. I mean, it's not necessarily treading new ground in that regard. I mean, possibly the show it reminds me most of is a Cartoon Network show in the Adult Swim bit called, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, in which the character from the 60s Hanna-Barbera show, Birdman from Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, becomes a lawyer and has to represent other Hanna-Barbera characters in court for various reasons, such as what if Fred Flintstone got arrested because they thought he was in the mob? What if Secret Squirrel got arrested as a spy? What if the Jetsons tried to sue the past for destroying the environment? Things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's riffing on the whole kind of taking the franchise, poking fun at its really, really silly elements, kind of embracing that with a sort of madcap sense of humour. So it's possibly taking things that have been done slightly more obscurely and just making it mainstream because it's Marvel. But it is funny and it does work on its own terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, see my comments earlier about Harley Quinn, I guess, for how much credit you ought to give corporations for having the willingness to make self-aware jokes. But if you are willing to get past that particular ethical conundrum, then this does do a decent job of it. And, Tatiana Maslany was great in Orphan Black, and she's also great here.
Yes, yeah, no, I think as I said, that her charm and wit is the load-bearing pillar of the show. It totally works.
Yeah, she's not getting quite as many flexing opportunities as she did in Orphan Black, I guess, but she's incredibly charismatic and she carries the show even when some of the plots get a bit weird and weak and makes it work even through this layer of CGI, so fair enough. Okay, and lastly, moving much like She-Hulk herself, a short way along the Disney Plus menu, we now get to Werewolf by Night, the Marvel Halloween special for this year, which focuses on a mysterious monster hunter who has died and left the Bloodstone to whoever can win a massive hunt. The obvious way of dishing out your inheritance. And so we see a big scrap between a group of other monster hunters, including his estranged daughter, Elsa Bloodstone, and the mysterious Jack. Minimal spoilers, guys, but Jack's next to the title, and the title is Werewolf by Night, and Jack might have a secret. So yep, this is this year's Marvel Halloween special. Who knows if they'll do another one? It's a one-off, hour-long thing. It's a sort of black and white, classic monster movie homage type thing. Bit of hunting, bit of violence. We've seen it. Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, so I don't know. I would describe this as a Halloween novelty. Is probably the best way to approach this. It's like 50 minutes long. It's, I think, technically considered a film, but I suppose it's like a one-off standalone TV episode. Yeah, it's got some good story and some good scene, but it's best really enjoyed as a sort of novelty Halloween experience. My favourite aspect of it is, as you say in the opening, how they embraced the kind of classic monster movie sort of style. It's got like an old school score. It's got old school 1950s Hollywood like title sequence. It's all in black and white. My absolute favourite thing about it, which I noticed, is that they've digitally added cigarette burns. So it, looks like an old film that has cigarette burns. They used to have to change to tell the projectors at what point they had to switch reel. Whoever came with the idea of putting that in was a genius. Yeah, and as a sort of stylistic sort of novelty Halloween treat, it works on those terms.
Yeah, it's fun. It's bollocks, but it clearly knows it's bollocks. It moves along quickly. It channels its influences well. There's not a lot to it. I doubt this will be a long segment, but crucially, it's a one-off, like less than an hour thing. It's basically one TV episode. After more than one franchise property, both for Marvel and other people, where it felt like they really misjudged the amount of time they needed versus the amount of time they gave it. This felt pretty clean. This felt like they gave the plot the right amount of time. It does its thing, it gets the characters across, it gets out. It leaves a bit of place where there could be a sequel, but it doesn't bash you over the head with franchise jumping off points. I mean, shit, there isn't even a post-credit scene. Yeah, no, it's not going to blow anyone's mind, but it's a fun thing for the time of year. I enjoyed it. I had a nice time. Yeah,
it works as a tight bit of storytelling. It's got setup, complication, and then finale. So film kind of compressed. I suppose in that sense it is a film kind of compressed down to 50 minutes. This definitely did not need to be like an hour and a half long feature film.
You could have probably, I don't know, put in a bit more character developments and expanded things out a bit more and got it to an hour and a half. But yeah, I think doing it in this tight space did work pretty well.
Yeah, it's all contiguous in that time unfolds in a sort of linear way. There's no flashbacks, there's no sort of added narrative complications, and it tells this kind of neat story in a straightforward arc.
Yeah, no, the characters have enough personality to fill the space, unlike certain other Lord of the Rings based shows. And the aesthetic feels interesting and different enough. There could probably be a bit more effort to actually be scary with all these horror trappings. There's a few key moments of sort of violent ick where sharp things go into soft parts of people's bodies. But apart from that, it is probably quite standard Marvel fighting, but then again, what did you expect? And also, I'm not super familiar with a lot of the classic monster horror stuff they're invoking, so I don't really know how horrible and scary and terrifying those things actually were. I don't know whether you were actually likely to completely shit your pants when watching these films, or whether they were actually just sort of quite corny and Halloween-y.
Well, they certainly didn't show that much violence a lot of the time, because, there was limits to what you could get away with. I mean, it's a very broad spectrum we're talking about, but certainly a lot of these old monster horror movies, they were made in a time that visually, what you could see and show on screen was so much tamer than what you can see today. But they were very, very scary because they worked with what they had. It's interesting, actually, the BFI is doing a horror season now, so quite a lot of these, you can go see these films in London if you want, or on the BFI player if you're not in London. And I think like one classic example they're showing is like Cat People, in which I don't think in the whole film you ever actually see the mysterious predator that's stalking the woman. It's just creepy as fuck throughout. And I suppose one of the things they kind of is that they do, because it's a Marvel thing, ultimately when it comes down to like a climactic moment, there's a big fight between monster hunters and monsters. Whereas I felt, with special effects and violence, but they're kind of borrowing the style of a classic film classic monster film rather than trying to actually make one. It's not I think, aiming to be super scary. It's more aiming to be like Marvel with, classic monster movie format painted over it. Does that work as a metaphor?
Yeah, why not? I mean, compared to other times Marvel have, tried to do another genre and then just done the usual thing, this is, one of the better attempts. They are leaning very hard into that style. There is, as you say, a lot of real aesthetic effort made to invoke their influences rather than just gesture at them.
Yeah, and it's consistently maintained throughout. Like, it's not one of those things when, like, they do it for the first 10 minutes and then after, yeah, you get the picture now.
Yeah, it is quite well directed. Like, there's a lot of really cool visuals in this.
Yeah, I get the feeling it's probably quite fun to make.
Yeah, there's a lot of Marvel stuff, yeah. The Marvel House style has been roundly discussed and mocked, but this does actually look quite distinct, which is good.
Yeah, and they're evoking a very specific type of, film and period in Hollywood history. And I think if you were a bigger fan of that than I was, there's probably also, much more Easter eggs to dig up. And if you're a real expert in those kind of classic horror films, then there's probably a whole treasure trove of fun things to explore. Like I say, my favourite bit was I did notice they added cigarette burns. Entirely unnecessary.
Yeah, I thought it was an odd decision to play the werewolf nature of the main character as a semi-twist, but also call it Werewolf by Night and stick his face next to the title.
Yeah.
I gather that possibly it might have been a late decision to call it Werewolf by Night rather than just Marvel Halloween Special or something. And part of me wishes they'd stuck to the first title, but I guess it's all about brand building in it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really approach it that like it was a twist at all. I thought of it more as dramatic irony.
Yeah.
You as an audience are in on the twist from the beginning. You're aware of that he's a werewolf. You're building that knowledge into every time you're observing his interaction with monster hunters, when the monster hunter's like, yeah, I've killed 70 monsters. I hope there isn't a monster in this room right now or I kill him. I don't know why he's become Jason Statham. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a shame they didn't use his full name, Jack Russell, but...
There's a limit, I think, on even self-aware modern audiences are willing to accept.
Yeah. Also, the big shambling swamp monster they kept calling Ted, rather than using his canonical comic name of Man Thing. But
I mean, Ted's quite funny, but also Man Thing is also, I think, just beyond the pale. I think
yes, the famous Marvel version of Swamp Thing. The branding muscles really firing that day. But yeah.
I mean, that's the sort of thing that probably would have worked better in She-Hulk Attorney at Law when they have Leapfrog, who's a frog who leaps.
And Man Thing, who is a man with a thing. Yeah.
he's part thing, part man. It's
like
something from South Park.
Yeah, they did at one point, as I'm sure many comic fans will know, release an extra-sized special edition of the comic called Giant-Sized Man Thing. Hopefully that's the title of next year's Halloween special.
I really hope it is. Oh dear. I mean, yeah, it's again, it's sort of I suppose the whole sort of thing is done with gentle good humour, and yeah, it's got a sort of slightly camp nature to the fact. Again, I don't think this is really aimed at being scary.
Yeah, camp is the word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a low key camp, sort of camp that Americans like. It's not quite Rocky Horror, but it is kind of lovingly pastiching things rather than mercilessly mocking the tropes it's exploring.
Well, yeah, and it's good for the time of year. There's still a few days before Halloween when we release this episode, and if you haven't bothered watching this, then it is the right sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, it's a good one for your Halloween watchathon, paired with the Space to Zombie episode, and The Devil with Peter Capaldi on Amazon Prime, which I think is Amazon's big Halloween push this year.
Yeah, and if Marvel hadn't dropped this, we'd have just done Lord of the Rings and She-Hulk this episode and not mentioned Halloween at all. So, cheers, guys.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode on moderate fantasy violence, then please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to back issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you've really, really enjoyed the show and want to have us broadcasting into your lives at any given moment, you can follow us on social media at MFV Podcast on Twitter and Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. And you can also follow me on Twitter as @NickMB, Nick Bryan Writes on Facebook, and nickbryan.com on Instagram. Yes, different names on all of them for maximum confusion. And if you're around this Halloween weekend and you're doing the MCM Comic Con at London's Excel Centre, I'll be there in the Comics Village. Come and say hello. And please also buy a comic. Thank you.
If you want more from me, you can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we will be falling in love with our companion in the final Jodie Whittaker Doctor Who adventure.
What?
Plot twist. And then we will be running a hotel whilst dealing with the drama amongst our undead friends in Ghosts, both from the BBC. So yeah, join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.